The dense jungle hummed with life, its vibrancy a stark contrast to the sense of isolation that had begun to seep into every corner of his mind. The sound of distant waterfalls echoed, reminding him of the paradise he had once thought he had stumbled upon. A paradise, yes, but also a prison. For years, he had wandered these lush, vibrant lands, thinking that there would be an escape, that somehow he would be rescued. But that hope had begun to wane with each passing season. And now, there was only one certainty: he was not alone. He had come here, seeking refuge, hoping to escape the suffocating grip of his old life. What he hadn't expected was to find a world that seemed to welcome him with open arms, only to ensnare him in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was a beauty here, undeniable and wild, that pulled at him, a kind of allure that both fascinated and terrified him. The planet was a living, breathing creature, one that seemed to be aware of his every move. And then there was her, the alien beauty who had been there since the beginning, whose presence seemed as natural as the planet itself. Her eyes, glowing with an eerie hue, held mysteries that he had yet to comprehend. She moved with a grace that made her appear to glide rather than walk, her every step leaving faint traces of bioluminescence behind her. Her skin shimmered with a wet, slick sheen, a stark contrast to the dry, sun-scorched environment he had once known. He couldn't remember exactly how they had first met, whether it was a chance encounter or whether she had been watching him long before he had even realized. But over the years, their interactions had shifted from brief, tense exchanges to a strange, unspoken understanding. She had never spoken in a way he could understand, but there were moments when their eyes met, and he felt like he could almost hear her thoughts. Those rare moments held a tension, an electric charge that kept him on edge, yet he couldn't tear himself away. But he had learned, over the course of his time here, that paradise could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. The jungle was alive with threats, wild creatures, venomous plants, and the lurking dangers of the unknown. Despite the alien beauty's otherworldly charm, her presence also seemed to bring danger, both in the form of external threats and the darker pull of his own desires. There had been moments when he thought he could leave, moments when he had gathered the courage to try and find a way out. But the path always seemed to lead him right back to her, as if the planet itself refused to let him go. She had never stopped watching him, her glowing eyes following his every move. There were times when it felt like she was pushing him, testing him, leading him towards something he couldn't understand. Today, however, something felt different. The air was thick, heavier than it had been in years. The jungle seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched the rapid beat of his heart. The alien beauty stood before him now, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the bioluminescent flora around them. She didn't speak, of course. She didn't, but her presence was almost suffocating, as if she were waiting for something. Or perhaps waiting for him to do something. He had spent so long trying to decipher the strange signals of the planet, the hints and gestures that might lead to his freedom. But now, he wondered if he had misinterpreted everything. Maybe the beauty he had once seen as an answer was simply another part of the trap. Was she the key to his salvation, or had she been a lure all along, leading him further into a web from which there would be no escape? The waters behind her swirled, and a soft ripple spread across the surface of the nearby lagoon. The sight was mesmerizing, but it only served to deepen his unease. This world, so full of life and color, had a dark undercurrent. Every corner of it seemed to pulse with an energy that threatened to consume him, just as the alien beauty seemed to consume his every thought. He couldn't deny it any longer. He had fallen into something he couldn't control. There were no more plans, no more schemes to get away, no escape routes, no rescue. Just him and the alien beauty, the jungle that seemed alive, and a creeping realization that perhaps the only way out was to embrace whatever the planet or she had planned for him. For years, he had resisted. He had fought against the pull, telling himself that this was all temporary, that one day he would find his way back to the world he knew. But now, as he stood at the edge of the lagoon, staring into her glowing eyes, he wasn't so sure anymore. Was he trapped in paradise? Or had he become a part of it? The alien beauty stepped closer, her movements fluid, hypnotic. The soft hum of the jungle intensified, filling his ears as she reached out a hand, her wet skin glistening in the dim light. For a moment, he hesitated, but then something within him shifted. A decision was made, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Or maybe it was the undeniable connection he felt to this world and to her. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached out, his hand trembling as it met hers. A jolt ran through him, as if a current had passed between them. His heart raced, and for a moment, it felt like the ground beneath his feet had vanished. The world around him blurred, and the jungle, the beauty, everything, seemed to pulse with a powerful energy. He had crossed a line, but whether it was a line he could never uncross or one that led to something even deeper, he wasn't sure. And then, in the midst of it all, the realization struck him. He had been wrong. There was no escape. Not from her. Not from this world. The alien beauty had not been a curse. She was the key to understanding everything, why he was here, why he had been drawn into this wild alien paradise. He had been a part of the plan all along, but the true nature of the plan was still unclear. What would happen next? Would he finally find out the truth about this place? Or had he simply walked into an even deeper trap? The tension in the air thickened as the alien beauty's eyes glowed brighter. The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath, and for the first time he wondered if the planet itself had been waiting for this moment, for him to understand what he had failed to see for so long. Was he ready to face whatever came next? The jungle seemed to close in, and the alien beauty's expression softened, her hand still in his. But as the ripples of the lagoon grew stronger, he realized that the true test had only just begun. What lay ahead? Would this world, with all its beauty and danger, finally reveal its secrets? Or would he remain stuck forever, trapped in a paradise that was anything but? The answers were just out of reach, waiting for him to take the next step. And in that moment, he knew the only way to survive was to embrace whatever came next, for better or worse. The mystery of the alien paradise had only just begun to unfold. The alien beauty's touch was warm, almost magnetic, pulling him further into the unknown depths of the jungle. As their hands remained locked, a strange connection surged through him. He could feel the hum of the world around them, the pulse of the planet itself, almost like it was alive. His senses were overwhelmed. The usual sounds of the jungle, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of distant creatures seemed to fade away into nothingness. It was as though he and the beauty were the center of the universe, existing in a moment that felt both infinite and suffocating at the same time. Her glowing eyes never left his, and with each passing second, it felt as if the air around them thickened, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. There was something almost hypnotic about her presence. She was not just a part of this place. She was the place, an embodiment of its power, its mystery. Her wet skin shimmered like the surface of the ocean at night, her ethereal beauty heightened by the bioluminescent plants surrounding them. The jungle, which had once felt like a prison, now seemed like an intricate labyrinth with no exit, no way to escape. Yet, despite the suffocating feeling that clung to him, he couldn't deny that there was something alluring about it all. How had he ended up here? He had arrived on this planet by sheer accident, a shipwrecked traveler searching for his way back to civilization. At first, the landscape had been nothing more than an isolated island, an unknown place with its fair share of challenges. The land was rich in resources, yes, but also dangerous, with strange creatures and unfamiliar terrain that made survival difficult. Yet, there had been something about the alien beauty that had kept him from leaving. He had told himself that he was merely trying to understand the planet better, but deep down, he had known it was her that kept him here. Every time he had attempted to venture out, to find a way back to the stars, she had appeared seemingly from nowhere, watching him, guiding him. There was no clear explanation for how or why, but one thing was undeniable: the beauty of this world, and her role within it was undeniable. The woman had never spoken a word. She had no need to. Her presence alone seemed to communicate everything he needed to know. But it wasn't just the beauty of her appearance that held him captive. There was an underlying power in her gaze, a kind of weight that seemed to press down on him whenever they were near each other. She wasn't simply an inhabitant of the jungle. She was a part of it. Perhaps, in some way, she was its protector, its guardian, ensuring that the secrets of the planet stayed hidden from outsiders. And yet, there were moments when she looked at him with something softer, something that bordered on affection, or maybe curiosity. With each passing day, he had grown to understand that this was no ordinary place. The jungle was alive in a way he had never experienced before, not in the way he had encountered planets or life forms. There was an intelligence here, a sentience that reached out and touched him without him even realizing it. The air shimmered with it. The creatures that lived here moved with purpose, and the plants swayed as though they were breathing in time with the beat of the earth itself. He had learned to live with the dangers of the planet, the predators that lurked just beyond the horizon, the venomous flowers that could kill with a single touch, the terrifying storms that rolled in without warning. He had adapted to it all. But the one thing he couldn't seem to escape, the one thing that always drew him back, was the alien beauty. Her allure was more than just physical. It was an undeniable force that seemed to pull him in, no matter how far he tried to run. And for reasons he didn't understand, he couldn't help but feel like she had been waiting for him. But why? What did she want with him? Was she truly an innocent creature of the jungle? Or was there something darker at play? The more time he spent here, the more questions swirled in his mind. And yet, no answers seemed forthcoming. It was as if the jungle itself was determined to keep its secrets hidden, and the beauty was a key part of that mystery. In the stillness of the jungle nights, when the world around him seemed to fall silent, he often lay awake, listening to the faint whispers of the wind through the trees, wondering if he had been brought here for a purpose, or if he was simply another lost soul in a world that couldn't let go. Now, standing before her at the edge of the lagoon, he felt that the time had come. Something had shifted, something that could no longer be ignored. The air was heavy with anticipation, and his body felt strangely electric, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an energy that resonated deep within him. The alien beauty was waiting, her gaze never wavering, her glowing eyes reflecting the shimmering light of the bioluminescent plants around them. The lagoon behind her was calm, its surface like glass, yet it felt like something more was lurking beneath the water's surface. The way it rippled so subtly, without any apparent cause, hinted at something else. Something that was aware of their presence. Something that was watching. For the first time since his arrival, he felt a chill run down his spine. Was this truly a paradise, or was he just one more pawn in a much larger game? The lush beauty of the planet had always been seductive, and the beauty before him seemed to embody everything the planet was. Wild, untamed, mysterious. But what if it wasn't just beauty? What if there was a darker force at work, something that had been drawing him in, just as it had drawn others before him? What if the alien beauty herself was more than just a captivating figure, more than the mysterious being he had assumed her to be? As the thought crossed his mind, he couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. For years, he had assumed he was in control of his fate here. But now, standing before her, his grip on reality felt as fragile as the thin veneer of trust he had built with this planet. Had it all been an illusion? Had she been guiding him towards something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined? The questions gnawed at him, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted the answers. Because some truths, he realized, might be more dangerous than the unknown. But in that moment, as their eyes met and the jungle seemed to hold its breath, one thing was certain: he would never be the same again. Something was about to change. But what? The tension between them built, stretching out like the calm before a storm. And all he could do was stand there, waiting for the inevitable. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The air around them crackled with an almost electric energy, as if the very land was holding its breath. The alien beauty remained silent, her eyes never leaving his. He could feel the weight of her gaze, as though it was pulling at him, tugging at his soul, trying to draw him deeper into whatever mystery this planet had to offer. The shimmering water behind her seemed to ripple with purpose, as though the lagoon itself was alive and watching, just as he was. He tried to steady his breath, but it came out shallow, uneven. What was happening? Why was everything suddenly so heavy? He had spent so many years trying to understand this world, trying to make sense of its alien beauty, its endless wildness. And yet, here he was, on the precipice of something unknown, something far greater than anything he had ever imagined. The jungle, the planet, the beauty before him, they were no longer just curiosities. They were traps. He wasn't in control anymore. His heart hammered in his chest. Was this what it was all leading to? The sense of unease that had clung to him since the very first moment he had seen her. The way she always seemed to appear when he was on the verge of leaving, pulling him back into the wild, into the heart of the unknown. The way she had never said a word, never needed to. He had thought it was all just a strange attraction, a magnetic pull of some kind. But now, the truth began to dawn on him. This wasn't a simple meeting of two beings in an isolated world. This was something more. The jungle seemed to react to his inner turmoil, its sounds growing louder, more intense. The wind picked up, sending the bioluminescent plants swaying, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The distant calls of creatures echoed through the trees, a cacophony of life and death, each sound now taking on an ominous tone. The sense that he wasn't alone, that something else was watching, intensified. He could feel it in the way the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, in the way his pulse quickened. Someone was out there, lurking in the shadows. "Why are you doing this?" he finally whispered, his voice strained. The words were more for himself than for her, a desperate attempt to break the silence that had stretched for what felt like an eternity. He didn't expect an answer, but he needed to say it out loud. He needed to hear the question leave his lips. The beauty didn't respond, of course. She never had. Her expression remained unreadable, as distant as the stars themselves. But that wasn't what frightened him. What terrified him was the feeling that she didn't need to speak. The jungle didn't need words either. It communicated in other ways, through the ripples in the water, the flickering of the lights, the subtle changes in the atmosphere. She was part of it all. She was this place. His mind raced. What did she want from him? Was this all some kind of test? Was he a part of the plan, or was he just another wayward traveler caught in the web of this ancient, unknowable world? Without warning, she moved toward him, her lithe form gliding through the air like a shadow. The silence between them deepened, and for the first time since meeting her, he felt an overwhelming sense of inevitability. Something was coming, something that had been building up from the very first moment they had crossed paths. He tried to back away, but his body wouldn't respond. It was as though he was paralyzed by her presence, by the weight of everything around him. The jungle closed in, its dense foliage and towering trees pressing in from all sides. He was trapped with her. Her hand reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his skin. The sensation was like fire, a shock that shot through him, straight to his core. His body tensed, his muscles locking up as though frozen in time. He could feel the power radiating off of her, the energy of the planet itself flowing through her, making her more than just a woman, more than just an alien. She was a force. I'm not like you," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I don't belong here." The words felt hollow in his mouth, but he had to say them. He had to hold on to something, anything. He needed to remind himself that he was still human, that he wasn't just another pawn in some twisted game, but she didn't seem to care. Her eyes, those glowing, almost otherworldly eyes, stared into his, and for a moment he thought he saw something flicker in them. Was it pity? Understanding? Or was it something darker, something that made his blood run cold? As if in response to his plea, the ground beneath him shifted, and the jungle seemed to groan in anticipation. The trees twisted, the vines tightening around his legs, pulling him closer to her. Panic surged through him, and he fought against the restraints, but it was no use. The jungle was alive, and it was unwilling to let him go. A sudden roar echoed from the depths of the jungle, a bone-chilling sound that made his heart stop. It was followed by the thunderous crashing of something large moving through the underbrush. His eyes darted around, searching for the source of the noise, but he saw nothing. Just shadows, and then a low hiss. He wasn't alone. The beauty didn't flinch. She didn't seem concerned by the approaching danger. In fact, she almost seemed to welcome it. Was she guiding him toward it? Was she leading him into the heart of the storm, where there was no escape? The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as a large shadow emerged from the trees. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, tall, hunched, with glowing eyes of its own. It was monstrous, its body covered in scales that shimmered in the low light, and its jaws were wide, dripping with saliva. It wasn't just a predator. It was a creature of nightmares. And it was coming for him. The beauty finally spoke, her voice soft and almost melodic. "You belong here now," she whispered, as though speaking a truth he had known all along, but had been too afraid to accept. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. And in that moment, he realized that the choice had never been his to make. He had been chosen. He had been brought here for a reason. But what was that reason? And what would happen when the beast reached him? Everything hinged on this moment. The jungle, the beauty, the danger, it was all coming together in a single, terrifying moment of truth. And he was standing at the center of it all, caught between the promise of something greater and the threat of annihilation. The creature's growl resonated through the air, deep and primal, vibrating in his chest. Its eyes locked onto him with an unrelenting hunger, a ferocity that made his body freeze in place. There was no time for thought, only instinct. He should run, but his legs wouldn't move. The jungle had him, and it had him in ways he couldn't understand. His pulse raced, sweat beading on his forehead, the ground beneath him still pulsing with the rhythm of the unseen, ever-present force that was the planet itself. But then, as if to mock the terror that had gripped him, a whistle, high-pitched and alien, unlike anything he had ever heard. It cut through the heavy, stifling silence like a blade, and for a moment, even the creature seemed to pause, its ears twitching. The beauty, her expression unreadable, her gaze still locked on him, made no move, no indication that she noticed the sound. But everything inside of him told him it wasn't just any noise. Then the ground beneath him shifted again. He felt the subtle vibrations, deeper this time. It wasn't the creature that had made them. It wasn't the jungle itself. This was something, someone else. Someone else was out there, moving in the shadows, closing in on the same creature that was slowly inching closer to him. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the unseen force to reveal itself. The creature's growl broke the silence once more, but this time it wasn't as menacing. There was something more cautious in its tone, a wariness that hadn't been there before. The beast halted, its wide nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air, its glowing eyes flickering between the beauty and the trees. It was torn, unsure of which threat was greater. A sudden, sharp hiss echoed from the trees closer this time, far too close for comfort. He could feel it. The creature's attention shifted. There was something else, something new. Another presence. And just as the creature lunged forward, a figure dark and swift darted through the trees. A blur. The beast let out a screech, disoriented, its massive form twisting toward the new threat. But it was too late. A blur of motion was upon it, a flash of unnatural speed that left him gasping. The figure tackled the beast with the force of a thunderclap, throwing it off course and sending it crashing into the thick vegetation with a heavy thud. The air filled with the smell of dirt and sweat, the roars of the beast, and the unmistakable tension that only a fight of survival could bring. But it wasn't a fight for dominance. It was something far stranger. The new figure stood up slowly, its silhouette outlined by the bioluminescent glow from the plants around them. He couldn't make out its full form in the dim light, but the shape was unmistakable, tall, humanoid, and undeniably alien, but not like the beauty before him. The creature scrambled to regain its footing, but the newcomer was already moving, too fast for his eyes to track, weaving through the trees with an elegance that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't just hunting the beast, it was controlling it, directing it. The whole jungle seemed to lean in, listening, reacting, as though part of this was some grand spectacle, an ancient ritual too old for him to fully comprehend. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, it stopped. The beast lay still, its massive form defeated but not dead. The new figure turned slowly, locking eyes with him for the briefest of moments. It didn't speak, but the message was clear. Run. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline flooding his body, but there was nowhere to go. The figure was already retreating back into the shadows, its movements fluid and effortless. He felt the weight of the beauty's gaze once again. This time, it wasn't just curiosity that was reflected in her eyes. There was something deeper, something darker, a silent understanding that he couldn't begin to grasp. And then, before he could make a decision, before he could understand what had just transpired, the ground beneath him seemed to shift again. But this time, it was different. The jungle was moving with him, urging him toward the center of the chaos. The vines, once constricting, now gently brushed against him, as if guiding him. The air hummed with an energy that he couldn't ignore. The whole place seemed alive with anticipation. The jungle, the creatures, and the mysterious figure had set him on a path. It wasn't the path he had chosen. It wasn't even the one he had expected. The jungle had its own plans. The beauty, her expression unreadable as ever, finally spoke, her voice as melodic as it was cold. "You are not ready," she said, the words carrying weight far beyond their simplicity. His pulse quickened, fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. What did that mean? Was it a warning? A judgment? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but it wasn't the fear of the unknown that was the most pressing. It was the fear of realizing, of understanding that he might never leave. The jungle wasn't just a place. It was an organism, alive, evolving, sentient. He had been brought here for a reason, and it wasn't simply to survive. He was being tested, drawn deeper into something much larger than himself. He wasn't just a traveler anymore. He was part of something bigger, something primal. And whatever had been awakened in the heart of this world, whatever was taking shape around him, it was going to change everything. The figure had warned him. And yet, as the ground began to tremble again, the shadows of the jungle grew longer, reaching for him like fingers of fate. He realized that there was no way to escape. He had already been caught in the web, and it was tightening around him with every passing second. The beauty's gaze softened, but only slightly. Was it pity? Or did it hide something else? Something darker? Something he would only learn once he stepped deeper into the jungle's grip. Whatever it was too late to turn back now. And as the jungle roared to life around him, pulling him toward the center of it all, he could no longer tell if he was running from something or toward it. The jungle felt alive, pulsing beneath his feet as he was drawn deeper into the heart of its labyrinthine embrace. The tension in the air was suffocating, and the once soft rustling of leaves now sounded like whispers, like the jungle itself was speaking, urging him onward. The ground vibrated slightly under his boots, sending a ripple of unease through his body. But there was no turning back. The path before him was set in motion, and the only thing left to do was to follow it. The beauty was still by his side, her movements graceful and silent, but her presence weighed heavily on him. Her gaze was sharp, like a predator's, and the air around her seemed to shift as though the jungle itself recognized her as part of its world. The figure, the mysterious alien, had already disappeared into the shadows, but he could feel its presence, lingering in the space between the trees, watching him, waiting. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was a pawn in some greater game, his every move calculated by forces beyond his understanding. The jungle was a living entity, its vines and trees shifting around him as if it had a mind of its own, and the beauty, with her cryptic words and enigmatic actions, seemed to know more than she was letting on. She had told him that he wasn't ready, but ready for what? What was it that he needed to understand? Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled violently, and the air hummed with a deep, resonant energy. The trees parted ahead, revealing a massive clearing, the center of the jungle's power. In the middle of the clearing stood an ancient structure, a towering stone temple that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The air around it shimmered with an almost unnatural heat, and strange symbols, glowing with an eerie light, were etched into the stone. This was the heart of the jungle, the place where everything had led. The beauty stopped at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the temple. She didn't move, didn't speak, but there was a shift in her posture, something subtle yet profound, as though she were acknowledging the temple's power. He approached cautiously, the ground beneath his feet seeming to ripple as if the very earth was alive and aware of his presence. As he drew closer, the jungle seemed to grow quieter, the sounds of the creatures fading into a low murmur. He felt the weight of something ancient, something powerful, pressing down on him from all sides. Then, the jungle erupted in a flurry of movement. The beast, he recognized it from earlier, suddenly lunged from the shadows, its massive form crashing toward him with terrifying speed. Its eyes glowed with rage, its teeth bared in a snarl that reverberated through the air. But before he could react, the beauty stepped forward, her hand raised as if in command. A surge of energy pulsed from her, a wave of force so powerful that it sent the creature stumbling back, its howls of fury echoing through the jungle. The ground shook beneath them as the beast faltered, its limbs trembling. He stared at her in awe, realizing that the beauty was no mere observer. She was a force of nature herself, a creature of the jungle wielding its power with ease. But it was in that moment, in the heart of the jungle's power, that everything shifted. The air grew colder, and the ground trembled once more. The glowing symbols on the temple's walls began to pulse in time with the vibrations of the earth. And then, from the shadows of the jungle, the figure appeared once more, moving faster than he could comprehend, its movements almost too fluid to track. It stood in front of the beauty, its silhouette framed by the temple's eerie glow. Its eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The jungle held its breath. And then, with a voice that resonated in his very bones, the figure spoke. "You've been a part of this from the moment you set foot on this world. You're not here by accident. This jungle, this world has chosen you. It has been guiding you. But it's not just the jungle that watches you." The words hit him like a thunderclap. He had thought he was in control, that he was making choices, but the reality was far more chilling. He wasn't a pawn in a game of survival. He was the piece that had been placed at the center of something far more ancient, more powerful. The jungle, the beauty, the figure, they had all been waiting for him. "You've been tested," the figure continued. "The jungle knew you were capable of surviving, of adapting. But that was just the beginning." It paused, its gaze piercing. "Now, the true test begins." The air grew thicker, and the jungle seemed to close in around them. The beast, still recovering from the beauty's powerful gesture, let out a low growl, its eyes shifting between the figure and the beauty. But it was clear now, the jungle was no longer on its side. The creature was no longer the threat. It was a part of the larger puzzle, a tool in a game he had no hope of understanding fully. As the figure stepped closer, the symbols on the temple blazed brighter, their glow intensifying until the very air seemed to hum with power. He felt a strange pull toward the temple, an irresistible force that seemed to drag him forward. The beauty looked at him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held something more now. A knowing, a warning. "This is your choice," she said, her voice soft but filled with unspoken weight. "But remember, there is no going back from this." The figure turned toward the temple, and the jungle responded in kind. The vines, the trees, the very earth itself began to bend and shift, reshaping before his eyes. The temple's entrance opened, revealing a dark, swirling void within. A new path, a new destiny. The jungle's pulse quickened, the ground trembling beneath his feet as if urging him to step forward. He felt the weight of the beauty's gaze on him, but he didn't know if it was a warning or an invitation. The figure glanced back, its eyes reflecting a depth of ancient knowledge. "It's time," it said, its voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the jungle. And with that, the jungle erupted in a final burst of energy, and he was swept forward into the unknown, the door to a new world opening before him. The creature, the beauty, the jungle, they were all part of something bigger, something beyond comprehension. And as he stepped into the swirling darkness, he realized the truth. This was only the beginning. The real journey had just begun. The tension had reached its peak. The characters had battled not only the physical elements of their surroundings, but the psychological strain of being trapped in an alien world. For years, they'd searched for ways to survive, to escape, and to understand the mysterious forces at play. And now, in the thick of it all, they were about to face their most pivotal moment. The alien girl, whom they had come to know not only as a powerful and enigmatic presence, but as a reluctant ally, stood before the entrance to the portal. Her expression, once filled with the wild beauty of the unknown, now held a deep complexity. It wasn't just survival that had been at stake. It was the very nature of what it meant to be human, the unspoken bond that had formed between them all over these countless years in a strange, inhospitable paradise. Her long, wet hair clung to her glowing skin, the environment's unnatural mist swirling around her like an ethereal cloak. She had undergone so many transformations in those years, but there was still something wild, untamed, and impossibly beautiful about her. The otherworldly charm that had once captivated the humans now seemed a distant memory, overshadowed by the much deeper connection they'd formed through trials and shared struggles. The humans, scarred by their time on the alien world but not broken, were gathered behind her, waiting. Some had lost their hope in the idea of ever going home. Some had found solace in the fact that even if they never escaped, they had found a family. But it was clear everyone knew there was something more at stake here than just their personal survival. The future was uncertain, yet the portal shimmered with a strange allure. As the alien girl stepped closer to the threshold, there was a moment of uncertainty. Her gaze swept across the faces of the humans who had become her closest allies. Her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something softer, more human. The irony was not lost on her. She had come to this strange place as an outsider, an invader from a distant star. Yet, she now stood at the precipice of a new reality, one where she had to choose between the paradise that had held her captive and the possibility of returning to her roots, her home. She hesitated. The humans, too, stood frozen in place. The years they had spent trapped in this alien world had transformed them. They were no longer just survivors. They had become stronger, more capable, wiser, and braver. And in that time, they had learned to trust each other, to rely on each other in ways they never thought possible before. The leader of the humans, once reluctant to trust anyone, now stood beside her. He had spent so long fighting for survival, for a way back that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope again. But seeing the alien girl now so far from the creature who had arrived with no understanding of their world made him realize how much they had all changed. Maybe they hadn't just been trying to survive. Maybe they had been trying to find a way to build something new, something that might offer a glimmer of hope, even in the darkest of times. The alien girl took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been this close to making a decision of such magnitude. The portal before her promised escape, but it also promised uncertainty. What would it mean to leave this world behind? What would it mean to leave the humans who had helped her, who had become something far beyond mere companions? And what about her own kind? Would they welcome her back, or would she forever be marked as an outsider? But as she stood there, in that moment of decision, she knew she could not go back. The humans had shown her something she never expected to find in the cold, harsh universe, a sense of belonging. She wasn't just an alien anymore. She was part of something larger, something that transcended species and origins. With that realization, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown. The portal shimmered as she entered, and for a moment there was silence. The humans waited with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. The light from the portal flickered, then dimmed. And then, the unexpected happened. The alien girl appeared on the other side, not as the creature they had once known, but as something entirely different. Her form was no longer just that of an alien. It had merged with something distinctly human, something that mirrored the transformation they had all gone through. The boundaries between what was foreign and familiar had blurred. The divide between their species had narrowed. For the first time, they were truly united, not by the place they had come from, but by the shared experiences that had forged them into something more. She had learned from them. They had learned from her. And together, they were stronger than they ever could have been alone. As the humans crossed into the new world, one by one, they looked around at the paradise that awaited them. It was nothing like they had expected. This world was not perfect, but it was theirs to shape, theirs to inhabit. It was a world of possibilities, a world where they could create their own future, free from the constraints of their past lives. The journey had been long, filled with uncertainty, pain, and hardship. But in the end, it was the human spirit, the unyielding drive to adapt and thrive, that had brought them to this new beginning. And as they looked at the alien girl, no longer just an alien, but a friend, a companion, a part of their shared story, they knew that this was just the beginning of something even greater, something that transcended the boundaries of species, time, and space. As they took their first steps into the new world, they knew one thing for sure: they weren't just survivors anymore. They were pioneers,